What I'm going to start with is clicking on the SAP Concur app. So as soon as you get the notification to do so, please download the SAP Concur app and log in. And I'd like to call out a couple of things before we get started. So let's click on those three lines at the top left-hand corner, and we're going to select Settings. The first thing I want to make sure you do is double check that Expensed is turned on. This is going to save you a whole bunch of time when creating expenses. So you want to make sure that's turned on. The next thing is take a look at the Expense Assistant. This is what's going to automatically move those expense line items right to an expense report for you. And you can decide, first of all, whether you want it on or off. And second of all, whether you'd like your expense reports created on a monthly basis or by trip. Mine is set up to do it on a monthly basis. Next, you can decide whether or not to save receipts to your photos on your phone or on your device. I've turned this off because I don't like to use up the space. I trust that Concur is going to save the receipt for me as long as I need it. So those are some of the key things in settings that I wanted you to be aware of. So let's get started with creating an expense report. The first thing we're going to do is click on the Expense It button at the bottom left-hand corner. And I've got a number of different receipts that I need to submit. So here's my first one. I'm just going to take that picture. And what the tool is going to do for me is read this receipt and create the line item for me. You'll notice when we get to the expense report, I haven't keyed in any data. The tool is going to read the receipt. It's going to do its best to let me confirm the amount. It's going to pull an expense type. It's going to put the date and the vendor. All of that stuff that I used to have to fill out on my Excel spreadsheet now gets done for me. So again, the only thing I have to do, make sure that the amount matches. And yes, this was a $6 receipt. And I'm going to move on to the next receipt. Now, this particular expense was for a dinner. You'll notice there's actually two receipts here, and this is important. I have the itemized dinner receipt as well as the credit card receipt. And the reason I need to be able to include both is so my manager can see all the details associated with what this dinner was, and I can actually include the proper amount for the dinner. So, you know, there's a tip that can be added to the credit card expense portion, which would not be included in the itemized receipt. Now, actually, while we have this open, I'm going to point out a couple of those icons across the top of the screen. The first one is this little piece of paper that has the line through it. When I turn that on, you'll see it makes life a little bit more difficult. If this is turned on when you start using Expense It, I highly suggest you turn it off. What it wants to do is optimize the actual picture taking. And when you have multiple receipts like I do here, it makes it a little more difficult. So I turn it off. The next one right beside it is this multi-page functionality. So receipts do not always fit nice and easily into a picture. Sometimes they're multiple pages. And this setting allows you to take up to 3 pages of pictures, which would all be included in one receipt. So let me give you an example. Sometimes a long hotel stay can be multiple pages. I know car rental receipts can be multiple pages. Even your cell phone bill or your home phone bill, if you're submitting expenses for those, can be multiple pages. And this feature allows you to continually take pictures up to 3 pages for an expense. Now, you might be thinking, what if it's more than 3 pages? And we have functionality to help with that as well. Those expenses that have more pages can be emailed through to receipts@expenseit.com, and the tool is going to use the OCR technology in order to create those line items for you. Now, I'm going to touch on hotel receipts when we move to the desktop application because there's a couple of things I want to show you with regards to that. But let's get back to this dinner receipt. I'm going to take a picture. I'm going to hit done. And it's going to confirm with me the amount that's on the receipt. You'll notice it's taken the credit card amount, not the itemized amount. And this is correct. We want it to include the tip amount. So I'm going to hit done. These are going to be analyzed, and you'll see, whoops, that one just moved automatically to the expense report, and this one will as well. So where did it go? I'm going to go to my list of expense reports, and you'll see this October expenses report was created for me automatically. It's already got that $6 expense from Starbucks, and that dinner expense is going to show up in just a moment as well. Now, I also have a couple of other expenses that I need to attach to this report that I don't have receipts for, so I can't take pictures of them. So I'm simply going to click the plus. And I did have another dinner expense, and unfortunately I lost my receipt for this one. Not something that I recommend doing on a regular basis, but we do have some options in order to help you navigate this. So I'm adding in the amount for the dinner. There's the notification that my other dinner is done, and I'm putting in the tip. I can go ahead and change the date. So this was from last week. I could add more details like whether there was business purpose or the vendor name. Anything that shows up here in red is going to be mandatory. If it stays in gray, you don't have to add it in, but you could. And I'm going to hit save on this, and I'm going to show you a couple of things once that's added. The first thing that we see is there's a red flag. So remember I mentioned earlier that policy is going to be embedded in the tool so that you know exactly what to do in order to follow policy. In this case, it's calling out the fact that there's no receipt. So I have to go to the add receipt option and go ahead and click on the missing receipt declaration and attest to the fact that yes, this is in fact a valid expense. I lost the receipt. I'm admitting I lost the receipt, but it is a valid expense and I do need to be reimbursed for that. So that's what the missing receipt declaration is for there. Now let's go back, and I have another expense that I need to create, and that's for mileage. So in going to a client visit, I do have to add some mileage. And you'll notice there's, again, those red fields that are mandatory fields that need to be filled out. So the from, the to, the distance, all of those things need to be accounted for. Now, if we go to add route, this is going to make my life a little bit easier. I'm going to click into the start location, and you'll see my most recently used locations come up. So I'm going to select our office address, because that's where I start from. And then I'm going to go ahead and pick the to address. So you'll see there's a couple of different routes that I can pick from here. It's automatically defaulted to this one on the right, and that is the route that I took. So I'm going to go ahead and click use route. If I wanted to switch it to the other one, I could just point and click at it. But I'm going to go ahead and click use route. Now this particular trip was from my office, so everything is good there. You could potentially remove a commute distance if you wanted to. In this case, it's not necessary. So I'm going to hit save, and that other dinner expense hasn't moved over yet. So I'm going to go to my expenses, and there it is. And I'm going to move it manually over to that report. There we go. So when this one moved over, you'll notice there's actually a yellow flag on this expense. And this is telling me I've exceeded the allowed amount for dinner. So my company has outlined some receipt limits or amount limits for certain types of expenses. And an individual dinner should not be $93. So a couple of things I could do here. It is a yellow flag. So it means I can either put in a comment and explain why dinner was so expensive. It was the only restaurant option I had available to me. Or I can identify the fact that there were actually multiple people at this dinner. And I'm going to change this to a business meals with attendees. And what this does is allow me to add additional people to this expense. So we can see that we didn't spend $93 on ourselves. So the first thing we need to do is fill out that red mandatory field of business purpose. So this was a client meeting. Whoops. Done. And next I'm going to click on the attendees and add someone else to this list. So you can see I have a couple of options here. I can pull from my calendar. I can use my contacts that are in my phone. In this case, I'm just going to add manually. Now, in my particular configuration, all I need is a last name, but I can also add a first name. Let's do Mary. And if I wanted to keep track as well, I could also add the company name. In this case, first and last name are good. So I'm going to hit save, and what you'll notice the tool has done for me automatically is split the dinner bill between the two of us. So now when I go to the expense details and hit save, that yellow flag is gone because we have a more reasonable amount being shared between two people. All right, so everything is good to go with this expense report now, and I'm going to hit submit, and it's going to go over to my manager for approval. Submit. Perfect. So now I am logged in on my iPad as a manager, and I have notifications of expense reports that require approving. So here's another tip. If you go into your profile, when you set up your CONCUR account, you can determine what type